Welcome, everyone, to this Academy for Community Engagement Scholarship Virtual Coffee Hour. And we are delighted to have you with us today. And I'm not going to spend much time, but except to say that ACE's really focuses on bringing community and universities together to make an impact on the world. And so with that, I want to turn this over to Steve Gavazzi and others, and I will let them introduce themselves.
All right. Well, thank you, Mary, and thanks to everyone who's here today. I'm Steve Gavazzi, and I am a professor in the College of Education and Human Ecology at Ohio State University. And I'm also the director of CHRR. That's the Center for Human Resource Research, which is our university's Center for Data and Survey Excellence. And I am joined today by several folks who are going to be helping me out with this discussion. But the two people who've been here from the previous one are Lou Swanson and Reneé Wallace. So welcome back to the both of you in your roles. And Reneé, I think you should probably go next in introducing yourself.
All right, thank you. Well, good day, everyone. I am Reneé V. Wallace. I'm located here in Detroit, Michigan, and looking forward to this conversation as I've been engaged with academies and businesses and community, gosh, for about 10, 15 years now, and I'm always excited about how we work together.
And Reneé is one of our discussants for today, and Lou is our moderator. Lou, you want to introduce yourself?
Didn't realize I was muted. Can you hear me now? Hi, so I'm Lou Swanson. I'm a retired professor of sociology at Colorado State University and a retired vice president for engagement at Colorado State University, and have been following Steve's work for a long while. And of course, have been working with Reneé on the strategic doing initiatives.
Excellent. We're also joined today by Roger Rennekamp, who's another discussant. Roger, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name's Roger Rennekamp, and I live currently in Lexington, Kentucky, actually just about 10 miles west of Lexington. I retired a couple of years ago after about 35 years in a variety of programmatic and administrative roles at three large land-grant universities, and I'm currently the secretary of the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship. Had the pleasure of working with Steve while I was at Ohio State University a few years ago, so it's good to see you again, Steve.
Likewise, Roger, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we've done the introductions, and you can see the agenda for today, which I think is going to be fairly informal. I'm going to first do an overview, a quick overview of one of actually three articles that I've written now on the radar model. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then Lou and Reneé and I, in cooperation with Roger, have developed some discussion questions that we would like to talk about amongst us first. And then the next part of this will just be a more general Q&A where we'll open it up to the rest of the group who's participating with us. So without any further ado...
I don't think Reneé was introduced.
I'm sorry?
I don't think Reneé was introduced.
She did. She went first.
I introduced myself. Hey, hi. Yep, Reneé Wallace, Woo Plus Detroit, Doers Edge.
Okay, so again, just going to talk a little bit about the Turning on the Radar paper that I had written with former West Virginia University president and former Ohio State University president Gordon Gee, as well as our mutual colleague David Rosowski, who is former provost at the University of Vermont, former vice president for research at Kansas State, and currently is President Michael Crow's special advisor at Arizona State University. So the three of us had taken a shot at writing a first paper on the radar model, and then subsequently, due to some really great feedback that we got from readers, we subsequently have put two other papers together now. And in the Q&A section, I will drop website that we've actually now put all 3 of those papers on. And we actually assume that there are going to be several more papers in the coming months that are going to come out on this model as well. Okay, so what's the driving force behind it? It's my very favorite quote from my very favorite president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail, and without it, nothing can succeed." So going off of the premise of public sentiment being that important, we began to talk about a radar model, which is really just an acronym. And it's just convenient that RADAR spells out a way of talking about getting feedback from the community, having that feedback brought into the university, and having that feedback then thoroughly digested, and then using that in a recursive manner to hopefully then guide future university actions. So the 5 words are recognize, analyze, diagnose, act, and review. And I'm going to say just a couple of things about each one of those. First, in terms of how we've written about this, what we're talking about here is recognizing emerging signals that are coming from the community, from our stakeholders, and in a way in which we're systematically gathering data from as diverse a group of stakeholders as possible and other sources. And again, it would be on issues that specifically pertain to higher education. However, this radar model actually came from hospital organizations in which they were using this to do quality control. And I imagine the radar model would just as easily fit in terms of most other institutions that are out there. But for today's purposes, we're obviously talking very specifically about topics that are of importance to higher education. So that's the R. The analyze then is analyzing patterns and trends using the rigorous methodologies that we have available to us, including, and this is perhaps most important to me, longitudinal data gathering procedures. And I'm going to tell a quick story about that. All of this in service to distinguishing meaningful shifts from background noise over time. So the overtime point is really, I think, the most important piece of all of this. Okay, so what is this all about? Why am I emphasizing the longitudinal aspect? My own little pet peeve about what's going on these days in terms of higher education is the surveys that are consistently put out by Gallup and Pew and Harris and others, but in particular Gallup and Pew, in which they continue to provide us with cross-sectional data. And they say things like, well, from last year, we know that Republicans are even more sour on higher education than they were last year. The problem, of course, with cross-sectional research is you're not asking the same people the same questions over time. Why does that matter? Cross-sectional data has its purposes. However, when you look at the data that we've gathered in our own higher education survey, and if we use political affiliation as an important marker, then what we found was from 2021 to 2025, over 30% of our respondents changed their political affiliation in those 4 years. 30%. So how do we know when Gallup or Pew or anyone else says in cross-sectional data that Republicans have shifted their opinion on higher ed? I would submit to all of you that that's not necessarily the most accurate information that we have. And in fact, what we saw in this last election was a smorgasbord of political affiliation changes. We saw Democrats becoming Republicans. We saw Republicans becoming Democrats or independents. We saw unaffiliated voters become Democrats or Republicans for the first time. So I probably beat that horse enough now to get folks. I see a lot, the nodding heads. This is the way that we really have to approach public opinion, especially when we're talking about change over time. Okay, so that's how we need to analyze this. That's the A. The diagnose piece then is diagnosing the implications of these trends for our own institution's priorities policies, and reputation, right? So there has to be some framework that we have that we are then using to help us to understand what the information is that we are being given when we are seeking this public opinion. The act, then the piece is acting. So, right, like it's not enough to just gather information. We actually have to have some way of saying, we have heard you, we understand what you've said, and we're now going to do something about that. And so that's the act component. And then finally, the model just completes itself by saying there's a review component, which is, okay, we've acted, now what? And so this is reviewing outcomes that are associated with changes that we've made, and then hopefully recalibrating our universities to ensure this sense of continuous quality improvement and our own responsiveness. That's a great model. I mean, I love it. The problem is that there's no university that I've found today that's doing anything even remotely like this at scale. So, great model, but how do we actually get this to move into practice? And that's where I think what we're talking about here today is that folks who are involved in community engagement and scholarship, I think, have an important role to play in creating these dynamic, what I call dynamic feedback loops, which, as it says here, you know, again, a true radar system that helps our universities to anticipate all of this flux that's going on in the system, what we might call turbulence. And of course, then in the midst of turbulence, sometimes you ride through that, but it's actually a lot easier if you're in an airplane to fly around that turbulence when you know where it is. And again, all the while maintaining trust. And actually, I would submit to you that we're building trust as we go through this dynamic feedback loop process. And again, the emphasis is on an increasingly unpredictable environment that higher education finds itself in these days. And now this is an actual quote from that paper that we had put out. And I like it because it puts a focus on the role of air traffic controllers, right? So the quote reads, "But just as radar requires skilled interpretation, universities need their own version of air traffic controllers, professionals who can translate signals into coordinated action. Without such guidance, universities risk flying blind into storms of public skepticism, vulnerable to sudden policy shifts and eroding confidence." And so I submit to all of you today that I believe that community engagement scholars and practitioners really can help serve as that air traffic control role that universities so desperately need. And so with that now, we're going to turn our attention to some of the discussion topics that Lou and Reneé and Roger and I have worked out ahead of time. But I also am looking, I think we have a small enough audience with us today that we probably can blend in our Q&A if there are folks who are thinking that there's some real contributions that they would like to make to this dialogue. But with that, then, Lou, I'm going to turn this over to you to moderate and to give Roger and Reneé the first cracks at these questions.
Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So, Reneé, I'm going to let you have the first shot.
Okay, so this is first of all, thank you for the work. It speaks a lot to the opportunity to change the way we're interacting, between community and a university. When I think about, using continuous public opinion as a radar to understand, the first thing that came to my mind was relationships. That to do this kind of, I think in your article you talk about our listening, the listening that happens, continuous listening that happens over time. To me, to get to that is relational. People at a university that would have roles and responsibilities, they're going to be there over time. Also connecting with people in community who are going to be there over time. And as we all transition or one way or another, continuing that flow and being able to have some sustained presence of people who are going to hold this process, right? Because it's great to have a process, but you also have to have people who can hold it over time. So when you talk about longitudinal, then there's got to be some folks who are paying attention over time. So those who have that ear, yes, those who have community engaged scholarship at their heart are going to be more inclined to have that view. Also in relationship with people in the community. And the other factor that came into play when I thought about this, I was like, okay, how would I apply this? And thank you for talking about the fact that we need more application, is that could you do that in certain areas? Like maybe your goal is to get the whole university, but radar might look like I'm doing that with ag bio research and I'm doing that with community sustainability along with the philosophy department hanging out doing food systems change work, in a particular community. Now you've got a small enough subset of people that you can determine who this public is that you're going to be working with over time, and you have those sustained relationships that allow you to hold that process and implement it over time. So that stood out to me when I was looking at it, and how that can align with your outreach goals, because over time you want to work on certain things, but stabilizing that through relationships on both sides.
So I just want to interject here, just for our visually impaired audience. I thought I would read the question just in case not everyone's able to look at the screen. So Reneé just responded to the question: how can universities use continuous public opinion radar to better understand what communities value in engagement efforts and to align outreach activities with those expectations? So thank you, Reneé, for that initial response. And Roger, same question to you.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Lou, for moderating. And really appreciate your presentation today, Steve. I think what Radar provides the system, our system with, is a very actionable framework for amplifying community voice. A couple of things, and I've written down a few notes that help me stay focused anyway. And my comments, I think, transcend kind of the questions, and may not follow the questions specifically. But a couple of things I like about the model, and first of all, it prevents universities from unknowingly and making missteps or communication blunders. I think you called them missteps, I think, in some of your documents, Steve. But I think Radar can help prevent us from making those missteps and communication blunders. It also causes universities to think about who their stakeholders really are and which ones really matter to them. And then third, it can catalyze introspective and reflective dialogue about whether the university truly values and utilizes the input it gets from stakeholders. So if you bear with me, I'd like to talk just a little bit about each one of those separately. First, about making missteps or communication blunders. If you watch any television at all, you've undoubtedly seen Will Ferrell pitching new products from PayPal as a part of the Pay Your Own Way campaign, right? I'm sure all of you have seen it. In the latest commercial, you'll see Will Ferrell sit down in the middle seat of an airplane, and he starts to talk about how PayPal lets you buy something today and pay over time with no fees or interest. And then there's a young boy sitting in the seat next to him, and he brazenly exclaims, "I'll tell you what else has no interest, me." And I think lots of times universities do the same thing as Will Ferrell in the commercial, that is, failing to think about who their stakeholders are and what they care about. Universities tend to talk about things that are important to academics, like national rankings of their programs and departments and average ACT scores of their incoming classes, maybe a little bit less so now, and the multi-million-dollar gifts and grants that they receive. But, by doing so, universities run the risk of conveying an air of elitism that distances themselves from many stakeholders. And by using the radar model, I think we can avoid such communication missteps. So, what about stakeholders? I think an important point here is that stakeholders are not a homogeneous mass. There's various subsets,
Mhm.
demographics, and interest groups, and I think that the question that all universities need to face is that, who are you going to listen to? And certainly we can do, random samples of the entire population, but, are there specific subsets that we want to listen to? And I think sometimes we fall into the trap as universities of listening to the easiest to access, such as living alumni. Okay. But for most large um, statewide public institutions, the number of living alumni is roughly equivalent to 5% of the state's population. So, what about the other 95% in terms of what they're thinking uh, and what their priorities are? I think we also need to acknowledge, and I think Reneé, you talked about that a little bit, and Steve, you alluded to that too, is that each institution is going to have a unique set of stakeholders. A small
Mhm.
private institution, will have a different set of stakeholders or communities, that they want to engage with as compared to a regional or urban serving university that may look at a geographic area that they serve and their stakeholders would reside in that particular geographic area. Very different from that would be a public flagship or land grant university that talks about the state being their campus. So what are the stakeholder groups or stakeholders as a whole that in fact we would want to listen to if we're a large public flagship or land grant?
Mhm.
And then it's also different for a national private institution, like a Stanford or a Duke or something like that. Their stakeholders will be very different as well. So I think the other
Mhm.
piece that I would probably say is critically important, that if radar is going to be successfully implemented in this institution, university leaders need to pay attention to the institution's culture or ethos. And I know, Steve, I wrote a lot about the ethos of the institution. And that is the institution really committed to listening and using what it hears to increase relevance? Whatever we do as a university, whether it's centralized or decentralized, listening can't be a perfunctory activity that deans, department chairs, faculty, and staff see as just as a whim of the top administrators. Listening has to be built into the very fabric of what makes the university what it is. So I think one of the things that Radar can do is it can be a tool for helping to influence and change that culture toward one of listening rather than being the expert that tells people what you need and what we're going to do for you and what we've done for you lately through our own lens.
Mhm. Mhm.
Steve, do you want to move on to the next topic, or do you want to have further discussion from those of us who are attending this webinar?
The beauty is that I'm the presenter and you're the moderator. Where do you want to go with this, Lou?
Well, so I'm going to add as the moderator, and as a listed discussant, I just want to add two quick things to what's already been said. Um, and Roger probably remembers this when I was at the University of Kentucky, but a colleague of mine in Ag Econ and we did panel analysis of farmers in the state of Kentucky. And a panel analysis gets past the concerns of cross-sectional, because cross-sections shift continuously as to what the audience is. One of the things that Radar provides are opportunities to develop different types of consistent panels of people representing multiple interests across time. And it's a well-developed social science research method. We used it for public analysis of how farmers actually participated in public policy, the tobacco program at the time. The second little point I'd like to make is that one of the things that ACES has been very much involved with is how do we connect students to communities? And students are the public. They come from all over areas of the public. So finding ways of connecting students via Radar through their courses, their curricula, with communities on a regular basis provides a dual opportunity for engaging the public. We're engaging our students which are part of the public, as well as the public in general. So, Steve, why don't you go on to discussion topic number 2?
All right, I'll read it out loud. What research and engagement activities most directly address the public's priorities? And the examples given here are affordability, teaching quality, and geographic equity. And how can engagement scholars make these contributions more visible?
You move to discussion topic 2 on your slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the one about the air traffic controller role. So I'll read these off out loud then, Lou. How can community engagement professionals serve as internal interpreters of public sentiment, helping leaders translate community needs into institutional action? And the second part of this, what structures or teams could universities build to integrate ACES-style expertise into strategic decision-making, ensuring that community voices are not an afterthought, but a driving force?
Reneé, why don't you go first and continue to go first?
Okay, sure. So when we think about relationships between universities and communities, I kind of think in a co-model, that so you need air traffic controllers in both places. So I see this as a role as a community engaged scholar myself, not from an academy, not affiliated with an academy in terms of having been a professor or faculty. That air traffic type controller role, I think, is very important on both sides. You need folks who have their ear to the ground, around what's going on, both from the perspective of the community speaking back as that controller. So it's almost like a dual, a co-role. So that when you're looking at interpretation, you're able to look at interpretation through both lenses, both over time, because we talked about the longitudinal approach to long data that's gathered over a longer period of time. But you also need people who can tune you in as things are changing along the way. So I think that helping with that, being able to do that, is having a regular cadence and process for your communications. How are we staying in touch with one another? I can't wait for a 4-year study to understand what's going on. I need to have the relationships on a continuous basis, and us having some sense around what are we listening for. We can't listen for everything. There's just way too much noise, right? So I think that, again, just looking at those places where you determine maybe over in a particular area in the university or a body of work, transdisciplinary, where people tend to work together in community and have folks who are listening, and they have listening partners in community. So that relationship piece still comes up for me as critical to this. And then being able to make sure that, yes, we're listening for the long haul, but we're also engaged in that listening along the way and determining how we can make changes along the way. One of the comments that you made in your papers were just about the agility, just that ability to make change over time. And universities, the agility issue can be a challenge, right? And you're not unique in that. Large organizations, agility is a challenge, right? So being able to listen, interpret both for the long view and what's happening in the short, and then having some kind of processes in place that are going to help you, interpret that within the current environment that you're in, and being able to put forth some initiatives that you can do with both sets of data, in mind. So that comes that whole air traffic. And also people who really are perceptive in their ability to listen. We all listen, but listening with this type of listening, if you're following me, right? When you're listening to translate and interpret, you've got a broader range, that you're listening through. So being clear that you're selecting folks, folks are rising up in that role that can be practiced listeners in that way is important.
Roger?
Sure. Steve, I think that first question on that slide right there, in terms of how community engagement professionals can serve as internal interpreters, I don't think that's a softball question. I think that's a basketball question for me, because you've already heard that I spent a long time at the University of Kentucky, at Ohio State University, also at Oregon State University. All that was with the cooperative extension system in those states. In Kentucky, we had about 600 people who are county extension professionals, county extension educators or agents. What we call them is a little bit different in each state. In Oregon, we had them in all 36 counties, in Ohio, all 88 counties. And, here's your built-in structure, at least if you're a large land grant university, in terms of who those individuals might be. Those individuals live and work with the people that they serve. And we had an expectation, and Lou, you probably remember this, and one of your colleagues provided something called Kentucky by the Numbers, that they provided out to all those county extension agents with relevant data about how their county is changing over time. And you take the data like that and you share that with individuals and say, what's this mean for you? That's the only way you really figure out what the strategies might be, for addressing some of those issues in those particular communities. And then what we tried to do, and as you know, Lou, is in terms of what the university does, we tried to bubble that feedback up from those counties, and that kind of stuff, to see if there are some trends that might be happening regionally or across the state. So, that's the basketball size question, is that, we had that expectation that every year, those individuals that are university representatives living and working in those counties undertake some kind of uh, analysis of either strengths and opportunities, or we used to call them needs assessments, or whatever they were. But the point was that we had that ongoing expectation that you do this, and what you do in those particular communities, and again, bubbling up to the state level, is based on the needs, concerns, and interests of the people in the community. So thank you for such an easy question, Steve. And Mary knows exactly what I'm talking about, and Steve and Scott knows exactly what we're talking about too here. And Renee, I might add too, I really liked what you said too, specifically, is that instead of a one size fits all, do we really have mixed methods depending on the audience and the issue that we're talking about? Is that,
Yeah.
how do we really use various methods of gathering information with particular audiences who might in fact respond better to a particular method of data gathering and community discussion? But I wanted to
Yeah.
do that shout out to you,
Yeah.
Renee. I really appreciated
And
that.
well, and thanks for that. While I was looking at the model, because I'm a process-oriented person as well, process systems and change is my area of work. And so when I thought about this, and thinking on a day-to-day basis, we're working, we're doing our things every day. How do you sustain continuity over a model like this and really see that change, happen? You The thinking of who's doing that came to mind. So when we have this second question here that talks about, the systems and structures, and teams and things of that nature, it made me think about a model where you have, people that serve in a hub and a core. They're not going anywhere. They're the folks who hold the continuity of whatever the idea of the thing is. And if you can build that with a transdisciplinary kind of approach, and my friends Scott and Lou will jump all over this, is if you have that kind of transdisciplinary team, and have that reflected, on both the community and the institution side, and you're operating in a particular footprint, you can get to some connection more geographically oriented. It might not get the full breadth of your whole institution, but when you can think about where you're located and who some of your closer stakeholders are, you may be able to practice at this with this core kind of group of folks that are mirrored on both sides and see how you can begin to engage with data that you've collected over time, but also that you're bringing in all the time. And we're playing inside of these roles and this team type structure to allow us to maintain a continuity. I think about this a lot. I'm in the process of implementing a change leadership institute and change lab and think about change over time. 1, 3, 5, 7, 10 plus years in cases, these issues and things that we're talking about are protracted, and so how do you maintain continuity? So your questions, here about the structure and how do we get expertise wrapped around it? When we look at like ACEs, for example, and we're international group, right? We've got members from all over the world involved in this. I think part of our opportunity in doing this is looking at the affiliations we have with, the universities as well as the communities and kind of picking some places and trying this on where we can actually uh, place the model, in a context. I can volunteer in Detroit, um, and we look at some of these big climate issues, climate change, climate resiliency. It's broad enough that you can bring a number of people, into dialogue around that. And there are certain places and people from a listening standpoint, we know we're going to want to connect with, now and over time. So those are some of the thoughts that come up, when I think about this whole air traffic controller kind of role and how we can really bring some structure, into some places to actually leverage organizations like ACES and our other institutions to engage with folks like me and others in our community.
Roger, I'm not Roger, excuse me. Um, movie, do you have a third discussion topic? Because I don't see all the slides.
Yes.
Steve?
The third one is here.
Before we go to number 3, could I just jump in? This is Suzanne, because this is so fascinating. Because I'm kind of losing, but I'll defer to the moderator. If it's not a good time, I'll just hold my.
Go ahead. I saw a message on chat saying you're going to raise hands on chat. I didn't see a hat. And I can't see all of you at once. So I've been going back and forth and I haven't seen a hand up. But Suzanne, I did see that Mary left a note that you had your hand up. So I apologize for missing that.
No. As we were going through the responses to the first 2 questions, what was popping into my mind is kind of managing up, if you will. I know in our situation, we have a new president. We're about to have a new provost and a new dean in my school. And one of the things that I think that Radar really speaks to is it's not about the extra work that community engagement, scholarship, and practice is about. It is the work. And I think that what we all are discussing and thinking is the kind of message that I'm not sure is managed up in higher education. And here's where I'm just going, and it seems to me, whether you're a land grant or a public institution or a private institution, you have 3 major goals that relate to the public. One is educating the next generation. 2 is the translational research applied to wicked problems. And 3 is acting in the public good. And those are my 3. And my sense is that there are leaders in higher education at all levels that have not embraced those 3. And I would also argue that community engagement scholarship is the knitting or the webbing that brings all three of those together in different ways, of course. So I would just conclude by saying this is a critical message that needs to start at 35,000 feet, not at 1 foot. And using this air controller idea is really brilliant, but it really rests. And I'll just conclude with this. Hannah Arendt said that action is the political skill. So how we embed this message with we have a new president who was the dean of the business school, graduate business school. My guess is he's never thought about this, but he may surprise me. But I would be unfair if I said it was just in business schools. But I do think there is a real opportunity here with radar. So thank you all. I'll stop now.
So thank you, Suzanne. And maybe Mary, I think you've got a lot of follow-up topics that Steve can be developing as well. So why don't we move on to the third topical area? And I'm not sure we can move much beyond that, given that we're now close to 15 minutes to stopping. Or isn't this for an hour? Okay, so go ahead, Steve.
I'll read the question. So how might longitudinal listening methods be adapted for use in local community contexts to better understand shifts in public needs and perceptions of university engagement? And then second of all, considering the decline of public enthusiasm for community engagement as found in the recent higher education study that I had put out, how should universities recalibrate their engagement strategies to make the public value of engagement more explicit and more relevant?
Okay.
Reneé. And Reneé, can you give it a little
Lou.
bit shorter this time?
Sure. Sure. So I'll respond to the second. How do we recalibrate in terms of strategy? I think that combination of the desire to listen long is good, but recalibrating the strategies means tuning in to those things that not only are showing trends over time, but what are people dealing with right now also, so being able to balance those two out so that, yes, you're talking to people and they've shown you something over time. But if I'm right here having a lived experience in the community, those leaders that are present in the community can tell you about that. So being able to flex your strategies such that it's not necessarily set for long periods, but that you're able to be agile and change it as the needs, are occurring. Things that happen, like what looks like in my community right now this year, is very different than it did a year ago. And we're flexing around that. And so when I look to my university partners, what I'm bringing to the table is nuanced based upon what's happening now. So I would say that your strategy has to be agile.
Roger?
I'll talk about the recalibrating as well, and Reneé, again, great comments, I keep going back, and I think sometimes I probably sound like a broken record, but first of all, we got to stop doing things as universities that alienate us and make us sound like they are that we're elite institutions that really don't care about the people of the state. And I had a couple of examples there that I talked about earlier, but if for example, and I'll pick on Lou, how much of the population cares if, for example, you have the best sociology program in the country? Sociologists, and students that want to study sociology. When we talk about, the academic prowess of our schools, like average ACT scores being 29, what does that say to the folks, that don't have 29s? It says that's an institution that's irrelevant to me. I'll never go there. I'll never be able to go there. If we talk about multi-million-dollar gifts and grants that we have to build new offices for faculty, and someone's having trouble paying their rent, it just, we've got to stop doing the stupid things that push us farther away from the people. For example, where I live in Appalachia, in Eastern Kentucky or in Eastern Oregon, you know, um, first of all, we've got to stop doing that. And you've heard me talk also about when you see the little snippets during March Madness of the institutions that are playing. What do you see? You see people in white lab coats and people sitting in classrooms. You never see community engagement work. So sorry for being so
No,
passionate about that.
no.
I'll calm down and bring my blood pressure down a little bit. But that was the first part. And then if we listen better, we can avoid those communication missteps. And I'm just talking about communication, but that also pertains to programs and strategies and things like that we have for actually doing work in communities, making that relevant as well, not just the communication. So anyway, sorry about that, but
So
that's
Roger,
where I'm
everybody's
coming
probably
from.
wondering why am I laughing and smiling? Because I threw the softball and Roger threw the hardball. Because we said this, we in a way we said the same thing. Listen, hear what's being said and respond. Listen, hear what's being said and respond because people want to know that our partners, us as engaged scholars, both in the academy and those of us that are in community, that we are really listening to bring the genius to action in the place where the life is happening. And we all live in community. So we can talk about community as if we are outside of it because we're not. We're all members of communities where we live. And so that ability to hear and respond and to know that, and Roger, thank you for throwing the hard ball because sometimes I throw the hard ball and I'm used to throwing it, but it's kind of nice to have somebody else, my friend from an academy, to throw the hard ball because that's the part people don't want to talk about. The other thing too is the challenges that those who are willing to do the work face to be able to get what they need in the institution when they do step out to do the work. Can I still get promoted? Can I still get tenure? Can I still get, respect? I mean, what happens? What's the cost, of acting in this way? We can say we want to build the radar in and all of that, and we want to be able to be responsive. The system has to be able to support people doing that. And I'll pause there.
Now, thanks for pausing there. We only have 10 minutes to go. So Steve, I'm going to go back to you real quickly. Is there any kind of, I don't know, I don't think you have a topic 4. Do you?
I don't have a topic 4, but I want to echo a couple of things that have already been said here that I think are really important that I've taken from my notes. First of all, and Reneé, you talked a lot about the need for immediacy, which I would say also is the need for transparency. And one of the things that we didn't touch on that is discussed in many of the papers that I've written already on the radar model is the need for a dashboard. And it has to be public and it has to be accessible to all of the people that we serve. And so I think that that's one way of building trust. It's one way of building transparency, but it's also a way of making things immediate so that we get that out. You said, I don't want to wait 4 years for a paper to come out. But if a university makes a commitment to, we're going to gather data from our constituents, boom, should go right on the dashboard. So that's the first thing I want to say. The agility piece, I think, is related to this. I think we have to, my friend and colleague, Gordon Geese, says that, we need to turn ourselves from elephants into ballerinas. And we can find ways, I think, of doing that. I oftentimes think of these large universities that that most of us have been a part of at one point in our career, and they're like these big battleships or aircraft carriers. And it's very difficult sometimes to get folks to think about changing the direction, and yet change of direction is possible. But I think it takes a commitment to wanting to do that. The other thing I think that I wanted to recognize is several of us have had the ability and experience to have built panels before. And one of the things that I think that we have not yet thought about is how to combine forces with panels. So if I could have a panel of farmers here in Ohio, they might be helping me to do research on agriculture, but gosh, wouldn't it also be great to have that panel feed up into a larger public opinion poll to make sure that farmers were covered there? So I wanted to say that. And then the last piece was what, Roger, I'm going to just echo it. I know that you said you were going to stop, but I think the fact that we have so many unforced errors that we do on a daily basis, it makes me cringe. And I think if we had to see ourselves as answering the public through things like public dashboards and other things that we've mentioned here, I think we would stop making so many unforced errors. So Lou, that's just kind of my wrap up in terms of the things that I heard.
Thanks, Steve. So we have 7 minutes left, and we have a lot of really distinguished people listening in here, Steve. So, and I also see a few extension directors and or former extension directors, and as Roger pointed out, extension is fairly narrowly focused on rural and I know Jorge will probably say otherwise, but it's very, having been in the College of Agriculture and working with colleges of agriculture, very narrow. We need university-wide extension, and the people who are here from who are extension directors are all from university-wide extension. So I would invite some questions. I cannot see all the hands at once. I keep going through, but can you? I just chime in if you have something you'd like to share in terms of Steve's comments as well as Roger and Renee's responses.
Well, this is Scott. Dear friends.
Okay.
Jorge Atiles, West Virginia University. Thank you so much. I came in late to the meeting, so I missed the first part. But great reflection here. Steve, good to see you always.
Likewise.
Roger, Renee. It occurred to me that perhaps in the same manner that we're talking about longitudinal listening methods, where's the scholarship? What levels of scholarship can be achieved? Because again, in that period of time, people still need to get promoted. So how do we actually determine at what levels and what tools can faculty utilize to be able to be recognized for that hard work that it is to build that trust, that space in a community that will be willing to listen to you and vice versa and be able to achieve, positive outcomes at the end. So I think there's still a lot of work that could be done there, and to really validate different levels of scholarly work that should be counted and acknowledged in that, rainbow of possibility of scholarship and getting people moving through. And Roger, thank you for all that you said. We are so blind about our own ways as university. Academia is the most egocentric environment of work that there is. It's all about us having to prove that we are worthy of tenure, worthy of promotion. So it's always about us, us, us. And we forget that we are in the public eye.
Hey, Scott, you had a comment, and Mary wants you to talk about it.
Thank you. So without dismissing the value of systematic gathering of information and compiling it, Steve, I'd be interested in your thoughts on my observation is that innovation often happens at the tails of a normal distribution, and those who are outliers sometimes have a very unique perspective that's not represented in widespread public sentiment. So to what extent is there value in the canary in the coal mine?
Well, I think there's a ton of value in it. And in fact, that's why any of these efforts should be mixed methods. And again, that radar model has a recursive component built into it. And so, again, in my ideal world, we put up large scale quantitative information, but then, right behind that, the university should be doing focus groups so that we actually have some way to find out from the public what's the response to what they're seeing. We saw this huge gap in trust between the folks in Ohio. I'll just talk about the part that is near and dear to me. Here in Ohio, we have almost 80% of the panel that we put together that said, yeah, we trust you to provide a good education. But less than 30% of them said that we trust you to keep your classrooms free of political bias. It's just a fact. That's what people said. The university doesn't like hearing that. But my question is, what are you going to do about that? Well, part of what you should be doing, Scott, to follow your point, I think, is you should be gathering up a group of people who don't believe that you're keeping political bias out of the classroom and ask them, what would we do that could make a difference in your eyes? So I think that the point that you raised is absolutely on target. We have to be talking to smaller groups, especially those that are out on, literally, I'm going to call it the fringes of opinion, both ways, right? Extreme left and extreme right, or extreme north and extreme south, however you want to look at your constituency.
Great. Thank you very much.
So we're running out of time. What I'd like to do is to pass this back to Mary. Mary, this is the coffee hour. Can you help think about looking forward to what the coffee hour can do? I mean, there are a couple of us who've been at all the coffee hours, I think, and this is the best attended we have. So do you have any kind of closing comments on how to keep this conversation going? And thanks to everyone who joined very much. I'm sorry I couldn't give everybody a chance to comment.
I think one of the things I would absolutely agree, and I think it's been a very engaging and thought-provoking conversation, and I hope it leads to even more action. I would be interested in thoughts from any of you about what pieces do we pick back up on. For example, Suzanne raised a couple of key points, and I think that could be a good jumping off point. I think we could, I would love to hear more about, okay, so here's this system. I am sure that you're absolutely right, no institution has embarked on this. But do we have some promising practices, at least getting towards some of this that we could look at? And it doesn't have to come from a public higher ed institution. It might be coming from somewhere else. It could be private. It could be a smaller college. It could be anything. So those are just some ideas, and I would certainly welcome you emailing those and responding. And we will be posting this out on YouTube because we want more people than ACES members to be able to see this and engage in this conversation. Thank you all for attending, and I'll give the last word to Lou as the moderator.
So again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I mean, Mary's worked hard on getting this coffee hour moving, and we've now got a whole lot of things that we can begin to churn through. Steve, thank you for continuing to be the rabble rouser out there, though you now have a partner in Roger who has basketballs in his mind. And to just generally how we can all help move ACES into this public discussion that Mary's coffee hour and other webinars have generated. So thank you for joining us, and send Mary all of your ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Great
Bye.
day.